I'm Lila Catelier. I'm the Curator of Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to introduce this program, Detroit as Resource Material Identity. This is part of a series of conversations between artists based around how we make the planet move, the Detroit Collection Part 1. We're so excited to debut the Detroit Collection up in the galleries this season. It's something that has been really close to our hearts and something that we're putting quite a great deal of energy and resources towards sort of building this collection, truly supporting Detroit and Metro Detroit artists, something that we're really sort of moving full steam ahead towards at the Art Museum right now. And doing a lot of that work is our Assistant Curator of Collections, Kat Goffnet, who is going to give a brief presentation before we sit down with Lester Johnson and Allana Clarke for conversation. So please join me in welcoming Kat to the stage.
Welcome to an evening of people who would rather not be behind the microphone. I'm Kat, as Lila mentioned. So thank you all for joining us this evening for our Detroit as Resource second conversation. Before I begin, I'd like to provide an introduction on Cranbrook's burgeoning Detroit collection, the exhibition, How We Made the Planet Move, and the discussion series that you're participating in this evening. For those of you who were at the first talk, this will be a bit of a revisitation, but it's valuable information, so doesn't hurt to hear it a second time. So in 2012, a new addition was made to the Cranbrook landscape, the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. With this new division, which is dedicated to revealing the Cranbrook story and the history of the campus, the Cranbrook Art Museum was able to turn its sights more firmly to the contemporary, in addition to continuing to herald Cranbrook-affiliated artists. Just a few years later, in 2015, the museum received a generous gift from the collection of Dr. John Hilberry and his wife, Andraka A. Sagarsis. This gift included the objects on screen, as well as other works by Detroit artists working in the latter half of the 20th century, primarily associated with the Cass Corridor movement. Though the Art Museum has maintained a connection with the city of Detroit and the surrounding metro areas since its formation through exhibitions, programming, and some collecting, the later half of the 2010s saw growth in solidifying its connection to the city through its collaboration with local artists and programming specifically conducted in the city, such as Maya Stovall's Liquor Store Theater, The Truth Is I Hear You, and performances for the blockbuster Nick Cave exhibition, Here, Here, to name a few. From these projects and others, the museum began a more intentional practice of collecting work from exhibitions such as Landlord Colors and Ally McGee, Banana Moonhorn. At the beginning of this decade, the Detroit collection became concretized in our collections management policy, and this specific subsection of the collection was created. We continue to show both Detroit artists and those with Detroit and Cranbrook overlap, collecting from each exhibition, and getting to know the city and its artists better, both present and past. In 2021, we began our Fresh Paint series, which seeks to uplift the practice of an up-and-coming Detroit-based artist. This has become an ongoing exhibition series, which we hope to utilize to keep momentum going on our Detroit-based research and collection. How We Make the Planet Move is the first public debut of works from this collection, which have been amassed through generous gifts, museum purchases, and commissions. Both the collection and this inaugural exhibition do not attempt to tell a single monolithic tale of Detroit and its artist. No such story exists. Therefore, the exhibition has been divided into four main sections: writing our own stories, neighborhoods, minding our history, the abstracted city, and material migration, to allow for groupings of works to speak on major themes and interests that have circulated throughout the city, expressed through an array of creative voices. However, many of the works in this exhibition defy confinement and can be read across narratives woven throughout the gallery. This exhibition will be the first of many in Cranbrook Art Museum's Detroit Collection series, as this special collection continues to grow to include more artists working in and around the city. The Detroit Collection aims to hold the art of Detroit up, giving it the attention and reverie it has rightfully earned, so special attention and care was given to picking a fitting title for this premiere showcasing. How We Make the Planet Move takes its title from a poem by Detroit-born poet Jessica Care Moore. A poem saved my life, an homage to Detroit. Much like the prose of Care Moore, the Detroit collection holds the art and creative spirit of Detroit up, giving it the recognition it rightfully deserves. The Detroit as Resource Conversations came about as a means to feature artists in the exhibition, bringing them together to discuss their practices and connections to the city from an array of lenses. Over the years, artists who have called Detroit and its surrounding area home have called the city, taking inspiration from its broad creative culture, varied social milieus, spirited energy, and shifting materiality. In Landlord Colors on Art, Economy, and Materiality, our now chief curator, Laura Mott, highlights Detroit as an active force with its artists constantly, quote, rethinking, repurposing, and reimagining, end quote. Many artists featured in How We Make the Planet Move embody this ethos, using their practice to engage with Detroit, community, and identity. Detroit as Resource Material Identity pairs artists Allana Clarke and Lester Johnson to explore the inventiveness of artists in the city across both materiality and generations. Detroit native Lester Johnson has spent decades building up his material vocabulary, working with everything from found objects to fine textiles to painting. Allana Clarke, a newer transplant to the city, works in materials that have connection to the body, including shea butter and hair bonding glue. Though these artist materials differ, they share a desire to comment on lived, embodied experience. Using abstraction as a primary mode of expression, both Clarke and Johnson demonstrate an ongoing dedication to reimagining what materials can be, how they function, and what they communicate about our identity. Allana Clarke's website bio states, quote, Allana Clarke is a Trinidadian-American artist whose practice is built upon a foundation of uncertainty, curiosity, a will to heal, and an insistence upon freedom. Fluidly moving through photography, sculptural and text-based works, video, and performance, her research-based practice incorporates socio-political and art historical texts to contend with ideas of Blackness, the binding nature of bodily signification, and the possibility to create non-totalizing identifying structures, end quote. Clarke received her BFA in photography from New Jersey City University in 2011 and an MFA in interdisciplinary practice from MICA's Mount Royal School of Art in 2014. Clarke is also an alumni of the New Haven Fellowship, a mentorship program co-founded by artist Titus Gapur. Clarke has been an artist in residence at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, the Vermont Studio Center, and Yaddo. She has received several grants, including the Toby Devin Lewis Fellowship, Franklin Furnace Fund, and a Puffin Foundation grant. Her work has been screened and performed at Gibney Dance in New York, Invisible Export New York, Savvy Contemporary in Berlin, and was featured in the Bauhaus Centennial edition, Bauhaus Now, Is Modernity an Attitude? In 2020, Clarke took a teaching position at Wayne State University, relocating the artist to Detroit. At Wayne, Clarke holds an assistant professorship in the Department of Art, Art History, and Design. In The Journey of Lester Johnson by Phyllis Johnson, she states, quote, uncompromising and independent, Johnson has spent much of his creative life in confident isolation. His African and Native American spiritual heritage has attuned him to creating powerful grand-scale totems that are brilliantly colored and high-spirited, making for a cross-cultural exchange of energy and vision. His body of work spans several decades and largely pays homage to the artistry of contemporary jazz musicians, most notably the late Miles Davis. Reflecting the sound of sophisticated jazz, Johnson's works shift between different tones and designs using bold semantics of color to mimic the sound of instruments interacting, locking, and unlocking in an exchange of ideas. Johnson's sculptural mixed media works are geometrically precise, made with abstract collage elements that knit together past and present cultures with dazzling color. The spiritual energy of his work manifests itself in detailed creations that are as touchingly individual as they are profound, end quote. Johnson received both his BFA and MFA from the University of Michigan, after which time he served as a professor of fine arts at the College of Creative Studies for nearly 35 years. Johnson was also a pivotal member in Gallery 7, founded by Charles McGee. His work was featured in the exhibition Seven Black Artists at the Detroit Artist Market in 1969, the show that spawned the existence of the gallery, and he was featured in Gallery 7 exhibitions over the course of the gallery's nearly decade-long career. The Sorceress and the Dreamtime Spirits, On View and How We Make the Planet Move, was previously exhibited at Cranbrook Art Museum in 1976 as a part of the Source Detroit series, which featured work from local galleries, including Gertrude Castle Gallery, Donald Morris Gallery, and Gallery 7, along with many others over the 60s and 70s. Johnson has also exhibited his work at the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, as well as numerous galleries and museums across the United States and abroad. His work is also extensively represented in both private and public collections, and he has been awarded many commissions across his journey. In September of 2011, Lester Johnson was invited to sign the historic Scarab Club beams, an honor that is extended to artists who have made significant and lasting contributions to the arts. Thank you to both Allana Clarke and Lester Johnson for their participation in How We Make the Planet Move, as well as today's talk. Let's welcome them to the front. All right. So, since the name of this talk is Material Identity, I wanted to start off the conversation with a question about materials. It's something that we have discussed both in our individual studio visits with each other before the exhibition opened, as well as in our pre-conversation. I promise we didn't let out all the creative energy in that conversation, although it was a blast. So I'd love for both of you to talk a bit more about what has influenced your material Rolodex over your journeys.
Okay, hot seat. Well, thank you so much first for that lovely introduction. I've never been on the other side so it's nice to hear someone else talk about my work, but yeah, material. So I actually feel like the foundation of my practice, I don't know who to look at. Maybe I'll look at you.
Look wherever you feel most
I
comfortable.
can't really see anyone out there anyways, and I'm just looking into the light. But the foundation of my practice, honestly, I feel is performance. And so, and my background is in photography, and so I very much feel like my body or ideas and conceptions of the body are the kind of foundation of my material curiosity. And so then the ways in which my work then manifests itself either through like object-based things like sculptures or through like performances or videos, more like durational time-based works. Everything kind of comes back to materials that I have a really personal and intimate connection with, right? And often things that are not traditional art making materials, but things that I just grew up with in my household that often had to do with these like beautification practices. So when I turn to making objects and thinking more sculpturally, those were the materials that I just felt naturally connected to because they were things that I had a familiarity with, but also like a depth and of understanding, but like a complicated relationship with, So I knew those were the types of things that I would want to explore in my practice. And I often feel like being an artist for me is an excuse to be curious and experimental. And so those were things that I was just curious about, those materials.
Well, for me, most of the materials that I've worked with are to sort of support what she is saying too, is that there are things that you're familiar with, things that you've had some connection with, or in some cases, people that you admire or people that are part of your family or part of your community. You try to include them in the work that you do. For instance, one of my choices of materials is based on my father and I. We had a business. It was a construction business. We obviously used tools and things like that in the business. Those tools were also things that you could use to actually make the art. I actually didn't think about it that way at the beginning, but the idea of a trowel or idea of all of the equipment that's part of that, the screens that you use to actually set up the job that you're working on was also used for some of the artwork that I did. The idea also is that I'd always look for a found object as well. One of the issues that you have to try to consider, and I talked about this earlier, as an instructor at a college or in other places, sort of the first day of class, you give the students a supply list. And one of the things that you think about later, I think about it now, is that usually a lot of the students, they can't afford the supplies that you give them on the list. Everything has to be Grumbacher, everything has to be Winsor Newton, everything has to be this brush or that brush or whatever. And some students actually, based on their economic situation, can't afford that. One thought comes to mind, it's just almost clear, as I think it's in either the Second World War or the Korean War. There were a lot of students that came back from that service to the country, and obviously they might have enough income to pay tuition for the school, but they did not have the ability to buy the supplies. And there are a couple of artists that come to mind who were in that situation, and they would actually go to hang around the class, and exactly maybe a painting class, for instance. I know that was their class at the time. I'm sure some of you remember the teacher at Arts and Crafts, Sarkis Sarkeesian. They would actually go back to the throwaway sink where people were throwing away paint and the base and the baskets and so on and so forth, and retrieve the paint from those receptacles and use that as their painting. And that became a style of painting, which is a glaze painting, which is a very thin coat of painting. And actually everybody else picked it up, including Sarkis. So that was a style, but I'm sure it wasn't their preference, the idea of not having enough income to support and to supply themselves with all the supplies that every other student had. But to their credit, what I think is very, very important is that they made the best of what they had. And some of the students even now have used found objects and found materials and so on and so forth to work with, which I think really enhances their creativity and their resolve to make their art tell the story of their life and their community.
To add to that, I mean, I feel like, and I think, this connection that we have of both being arts educators or have been arts educators is really important to the way that I think about creativity. And so, your comments about, not having enough money to buy the most expensive canvas or paints or all of these things that we have these traditional associations with, I think really brings up like an important point, and something that has also shaped like my understanding of what it means to make and be an artist, because you know, I didn't grow up in a very like economically well off, I guess how I'll say it, family. And even the idea of being an artist, or me telling, you know, my father that I'm gonna go to school, and I know we immigrated to this country, and like you have all these like beautiful, amazing ideas of what I should do with my life, but I'm gonna be an artist, you know, it's like, what, why? That's not what you should be doing with your life. And so that idea of, you know, not having those traditional resources or access to those traditional resources, I think actually made me think more deeply about what it meant to be creative, right? And that you're not always gonna have or exist in the ideal circumstance, but it's more about an interiority and a criticality that is within you. And that's why, you know, I work in these interdisciplinary ways, because it's not about any single or specific material or way of thinking or way of making. It's about the way that I'm thinking and processing information.
What?
Should I ask one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Well, I feel like we maybe touched a little bit, but like you talked about, Lester, also like your background in like tools, construction, and I'm wondering, you know, like that conception of making has a really kind of physical component to it. So I'm wondering what role, the physicality and the body plays in your work.
Well, the body's not the same. Some of the physicality of the work that you see here, you know, there's maybe more than one dimension to this. In the first place, and this is a story I'm sure that some people have heard before, is that years ago I was fortunate enough to have a Ford pickup truck and driving around and so on and so forth. And one of the pieces that are in this collection here, I actually found it on the street. I was teaching a class, and because I was kind of low on the totem pole in the faculty there, they gave me an evening class. And I was driving home. It was wasn't as cold as this, but it was a winter day. And I saw this piece of wood on the street. And it was, obviously it was just about dark. And I was, I don't know why, it's almost like that piece of wood, you drive by a piece of wood all the time, fascinated me based on the size of it and the shape and so on and so forth. And I thought I would just pick it up. So I drove over, threw it on the back of the truck, and took it home. The idea of the wood is like a found object, but also the shape of it and so on and so forth, it kind of intrigued me based on the way it was shaped. It was a natural form. It was the idea of using found objects as part of the work. But I didn't think about making anything more than just one image that was that wood. As the winter sort of warmed up and came into spring, I think it was a tree that was actually, the bark started to move off. And so I thought about, you know, just sort of reestablishing the protection of the wood itself. And so that was why it was wrapped in the tape. It was like the idea about securing life forces within the wood itself. But then as I thought about it more, I thought that that wasn't the only thing that I could do, is to do that one piece. And suddenly, you know, I went out and started going to different places to find other wood to make this. But the idea is, you know, the material itself, in a lot of ways, is material that is giving you information about different sources that you really haven't worked with before. I didn't carve the wood. I have actually worked with the wood in terms of the shape to actually use nature as a very important commodity in what we're doing with the artwork. And I hadn't worked this way before. I hadn't worked with this size and this shape and this many pieces. So to me, it was an idea about stepping forward and doing something three-dimensional, and it was described as sculpture. One of the interesting parts about it was entered in a show at the DIA and so on and so forth, and it was in the sculpture category. But a lot of people didn't consider it sculpture because it wasn't done in a certain way that sculptors work, you know. But that to me is a very important factor, that you could see something in the work yourself, and that you could make something out of it that speaks to you and speaks to the community that you're working for and from. And it can't be accepted by everybody. And this work has been around for a long time, you know. But I'm very grateful that it's finally found a home here.
All right, Lester, you're up for Allana.
I'm up, okay. All right. One of the questions I have to ask for you, and we talked about this before, and we talked about this on this mega Zoom phone we had, and contact we had the other day, which was very interesting. The idea of sound or music in part of your creative work. The idea of listening to it, being influenced by it, and I'll just try to combine two things together here. Looking at you and looking at your work, I very seldom do this, but I went on Instagram, you know, and I thought, oh my goodness. I saw, and I was amazed at how you actually worked doing the work. You were, shall we say, engaged in it, you know, your body, everything, your hands, your feet, everything is moving and so on and so forth, which I thought was, I know it's like the way you wanted to do it, but I was interested in knowing if you were working that way, was music influencing you in the way you were working, and was it a companion in your creative spirit?
Yeah, I'm really glad, Kat, that you showed the image of me like actually making the works, because I feel like, you know, you see an object on the wall, it has like a certain, you know, stillness to it. But for me, like especially these works, they're like inextricably linked to actions I've performed on the material over like a durational like amount of time. And so like I kind of think of these as like time-based works, you know. But to connect that to like this idea of like music and influence, you know, the like process of making these pieces is really slow because, you know, it's a liquid material once it gets exposed to air. So, and also they come in these 8-ounce bottles, this like hair bonding glue, which is like, it's like smaller than this microphone. So I go through a lot of bottles like per work, you know, like hundreds, thousands of bottles of this material, but it, you know, comes into contact with the air and slowly starts to cure over, you know, maybe a few days, a week, depending on like the quantity of material that I've poured. So there are these long periods of just waiting and observing, right? Like waiting to perform, waiting to act. And so for me, that like time in the studio is this moment for like preparing my body, preparing my mind, and music is a really important part of that. And so I'm often, you know, I listen to many different things, but I feel like like thinking through jazz is often the way in which I like process this material and perform with it. And I wouldn't say it's about like creating maybe necessarily like a direct like kind of one-to-one relationship, but it's about like kind of centering my body in the space, right, and creating, I'll say, like ideal conditions for clearing my mind, and creating that moment of rest before like kind of activating. And so it's using music as a way to like channel my spirit, right? If I'm trying to like explain it clearly, but art isn't always like that, you know. But it, you know, I just have these processes while I am waiting for another process to happen, right? So this like intermediary space that I need to kind of forget about whatever is not happening in the studio right at that moment, right? And to clear my spirit, to clear my soul, to imagine a space that is better than the ones in which we exist currently, and music plays a really important role in that. And to like kind of, in a way, throw that question back at you, Lester.
Thank you.
Because I know, like, through, you know, music also plays a really important part, or role in your work, and often through, like, direct titling, you're making reference to people that have inspired or influenced you. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, mostly the titles and some of my artwork is based on musicians. Just one kind of you know, connection is, as a youngster growing up, I think about people that are in my community who are actually musicians themselves, you know, and so you have a sort of an idea that if you have that, I always think that the title of the work should somehow pay homage to them. Because their creative spirit, especially improvisation, their spirit of making the best of what they had and so on and so forth, always thought that would always give you some kind of inspiration. But it also, you know, leads to thinking about, you know, how they progressed their talent to get there. I remember when I was in high school, a lot of the people that are probably so-called legendary jazz artists, a lot of them came from Detroit. So very recently, too, they had a tribute to that Bluebird Inn, which is a club on the west side of Detroit, which is very known for its local musicians and also international people that came to play there. So the idea of the spirit of the music is always, you know, top of the line for me. I've tried to make a dedication to as many musicians as I could. I haven't gotten them all, but I have picked out a few, you know, that I like and try to celebrate their talent and their creativity. And fortunately, I've had a chance, you know, in different occasions in my experience to actually meet one or two of the musicians myself, you know, which is a very, you know, exciting thing. And the idea that they appreciate it, the fact that you have noticed them and you've done this, I think is also an important factor as well.
Who's up next?
Let's do, I think we're at a good place to move to your second question.
Okay, yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm trying to be as natural as possible if you can. So, I feel like a talk show host. Anyway, okay. So I use materials that are often, you know, tied to quote unquote Black culture, or thinking about materials, you know, specifically that are related to these beautification practices of Black women. And so I'm wondering for you, like what cultural and ritual influences do you kind of draw upon for your work, or specifically thinking about your series, The Sorceress and the Dreamtime Spirits?
Well, the sources in the Dreamtime Spirits are take a page from the Australian Aboriginal culture. Fortunately, I had a sort of research into that area, and I was always inspired by the fact that a culture that I really hadn't learned anything about before has put together their whole culture, their religion, their living experience, everything that is a part of our life, that we take for granted. They've already had that too, and so it's always fascinating to me to sort of go to a culture, First Nation culture, so several other cultures that we are not really, sort of schooled about. You realize that not so much that culture is different than ours, but the idea that there's a unification of that culture and our culture. The idea about, survival, the idea about religion, the idea about the deities in that culture, the idea that the totems in that culture that actually have been part of their lived experience for years and years. And, before, we even knew anything about them, It's always interesting to see how our culture sees them, or as as a different culture, a different space, and so on and so forth. But we're all on the same planet, and the idea of similarity and kinship, I think is a very part of what you learn by thinking about those cultures. And you look for basically not so much the difference in them, but you think about what you can learn from them. The idea of the wrapping of the wood. I'm not a rapper, but I can rap this. You know what I mean? So that's a different skill, and I'm not going to sell albums and all that, but this is a little bit closer to what I can do, But the idea of the ceremony of actually using totemic form in your work is not universal. It is universal. It's not just for one culture, and you learn from that culture how you will be able to express your feelings as well.
I'm wondering, because you used, I think, a really interesting phrase, we're not schooled on, this idea. And that makes me think very much about some of the, problematics in arts education, specifically thinking about art history, and the global diasporas that are often left out of art history, especially if we're thinking in a traditional academic setting. So I'm wondering, for you, because I think what's really interesting, you're thinking about these higher levels of connectivity instead of these moments of difference, right? So it's more about this idea of unification, which I think is a really interesting way to approach it. But then I'm wondering for you, how much do you feel, or if at all, that you need to either educate your audience or correct their assumptions, or maybe reductive interpretations of the work, or maybe that hasn't happened. But I'm making an assumption that but.
Well, I think it's difficult to think about the international audience being educated, especially with things that they already know. That's the point. Some things we think we take for granted that one person's educated, another person's not educated. But then you have to think about how education is valued in every culture, you know. Sometimes if you educate one person to actually, you know, look at your work and reflect on what you're trying to say with it, and they see what you're trying to communicate with them, I think that's the first step. I mean, that's not as good as, you know, you have, you know, too many hits on your site and all that, you know. That's a totally different thing, you know. But at some point, it's very difficult for someone to look at your work, and it would act like a mirror, you know. They would see themselves in the image that you have shown them, and they connect with whatever you're trying to tell them through your art. That's what you're expected to try to do, you know. But everybody is not doing that, you know. But I think that's not necessarily the way you evaluate your work. You look at it from the standpoint of if you have the experience of relating to people, and you can see in their culture and in yours some similarities and a bridge to go from one point to the other, I think you've succeeded in the work.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd like to shake up the script a little bit, because I think you opened a line of questioning that we have in here, but I'm just going to pose it a little bit differently. So you were asking Lester about education and art history and thinking about what we traditionally think of as the canon. And I'm curious for both of you, especially you, Allana, what you're trying to address art historically, or with your materials, with your framing, with your color, uses of color for both of you especially. 'Cause I know that was a great thread to pull recently when we had our chat.
Yeah. For me, black is the color that I am most interested in, especially right now. And thinking about conceptions of blackness, so as material, as pigment, as embodiment, like trying to understand it from the space of multiplicity. And so, thinking then about art history and also like the kind of work or the direction I'm taking the material in now, where I'm like making these works on canvas, like with this glue material. So now it's like this very direct relationship with painting, monochromatic painting, abstract painting. And then, I'm like thinking about, well, okay, how art historically has the narrative around black as color, as material, kind of manifested itself. And so I'm often finding that how it's discussed or thought about is this like space of negation or conclusion or end. But obviously for me, black is not an end, it's the kind of beginning, right? And so then I'm like thinking about it from that like kind of oppositional space, right? And you framing it as my kind of beginning. So in that way, it is about multiplicity, right? There are all of these different directions in which now I can think about black in all of those various ways, all at the same time, which feels really exciting for me, and which also feels like a continuation or an addition to the narrative of black in painting, in sculpture. So that's very much the like lineage and like history that I'm trying to think through right now.
Okay, but the space that you're in now, the idea of putting together your image, if you start an image to work with, are you working with one image at a time, or are you working with several?
Well, so I think it depends on the mode that I'm working in, right? So like Kat showed like photography, like text-based sculpture works, these like bonding glue, amorphous, strange like sculpture works. So since this is the piece in the show, or pieces like this in the show, I'll kind of maybe stick to this, but I think it's interesting to think through. But anyways, I don't want to go on forever. So, I'm starting really in this like blank space, right? I've poured this material. It is a blank flat sheet. And so I cannot predict like what comes out on the other end. So I don't necessarily have like an image in mind, but I do have certain process, like certain action, like literal actions that in my like lexicon that I think about in terms of like how I'm gonna activate the material now. So like thinking about gestures like pushing, pulling, or twisting, ripping. And it for me, it's about like using the entirety of my body in that in that process of making. But the material has. It's very intelligent. It has a mind of its own. And even if I perform the same exact gesture with the same exact amount of pressure, it will never, that imprint, what it captures, will never be the same. So that mark will never ever be the same. And so to me, that like tells me something then about like the possibilities for the ways in which I can exist in the world, right? Even though it's like we think about our like larger community, the people that we're connected to diasporically, there are these like similarities and like spaces in which we collide, but it's about this divergence to me, right? This like kind of scattering in millions of different directions. And so like that's how I'm like thinking. I think I went on a little bit of a tangent, so hopefully that actually came back to something.
Yeah, but I mean, the idea of you working with that shape, the idea that, are you considering that abstraction?
Yes, because I don't know ultimately what shape the work will take. Because I do start, or at least for these, they're made in these like rectangular frames, but then because I'm deforming that rectangle by like pinching and pressing the material edge like together, the edges then take on a completely different profile, which I'm then like cutting out of like that larger frame, if that makes sense. So I don't know always where it's gonna go or where it's gonna end up. And these fail off, like they can fail like half the time. And I don't know why, but like, or what it's just about what I feel like. I work on it, now I put it on the wall, and do I feel like this space of satisfaction in terms of how curious I still am about it? And if it meets that metric, then I'm like, okay, it's good, it can stay. Otherwise, get it away from me.
But at some point, you're talking about, there are things, there are times within the creative process that you're working on something, and we talked about this earlier, like the space is empty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then you go in and you actually work on the project. Okay, you change it, you adjust it, and so on and so forth. And if it doesn't come out exactly the way you want to, you always have the idea that it's going to be wonderful, even though you're surprised at the results.
Yeah.
As you go through it, it changes.
Yeah,
Okay, so you don't have a preconceived idea of what it's going to be to start with.
No.
But then you are encouraged by the success of the finished product.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, how do you sustain that activity of going back into it or going to start another one?
Yeah.
If it's starting for another empty space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very scary. 'Cause also, also like racing against the clock, right? I can't, once the material has cured, especially for these where it's everything's poured at the same time and it's performed on like right away.
Right.
And once it's cured, that's it, right? That gesture is kind of frozen. I literally can't move a pleat or like push it or twist it or do anything more to it. So it's very scary, right? But it's also in that like terror, that's exhilarating too. But then, like we were talking about this a little bit before, it's also really freeing because it's a different way for me to work versus if I'm working in like video or photography or live performance where so many things are predetermined before I even get to the set. Or, you know, I need performers, I need to have like choreograph something or write something, or I need to know my location that I'm gonna show. Like all of these things need to be predetermined before you actually arrive to make the work.
Right.
But with this, it's so much more freeing because I have to do this right now. Like I've
Right.
poured material, the clock is ticking, I need to go. And I then kind of free myself from overthinking things and just focus on being in the moment right there and then with the process, being responsive. And so like the immediacy is really interesting to me in this way of working, which is so very different from many of the other ways that I work. Yeah. So it's terrifying, but it also feels like a break from so many of the like predetermined ways that I work in my practice.
Okay, but isn't that giving you freedom to make expression of the results that are there?
Wait, repeat that.
The idea of freedom.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because if I'm like centering that, and also if I'm knowing, like, I'm not feeling too attached to what the result might be, right? Because I don't know exactly, you know?
Right.
So it's just about being right then and there, and trusting myself, you know? Like, I think that's really important too. Being able to feel like confident, and which feels weird to say, because as an is any artist confident? Maybe like, I don't know, some of these digital artist. What is it
Or is
called?
it all a facade? I'm not sure. Do we all have imposter
The
syndrome?
Bitcoin artist. I don't know what it's. I forget what it's called now.
NFTs?
Yes, those people. Maybe they're confident, but but I'm like, what was that thing called? But though, you have to have this certain level of trust in yourself, you know, and a certain like vocabulary, I think, that you've built up, which I feel like I do have. Okay. And so then I'm like activating that, right? I'm like working from that space, and allowing the material to talk to me too, you know? Yeah. So it's like that back and forth that I find like really exciting, and that allows me to overcome that fear of failing or not, I don't know. Or,
Okay, but would you consider this improvisation or
Yes,
spontaneous?
Both? Are those different? Are they same? Both? Can I say both?
Yeah, you can,
Both.
It's your stage. You can say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want, you know. But the idea is the idea of actually performing, using that material to create your image, is and the idea of trust. I think that was very, very important. But the idea of moving from like photography and using that as a interesting direction, and then moving to this and still maintain the same trust. Moving from this to a new material.
Yeah.
How do you sort of retain that trust and that freedom?
Yeah, gosh, good question. I don't know if I have an answer to that, right? how do I do that? I don't, because I have to, because I'm just so curious about this material and what it can do.
Okay.
And the different expansive articulations for it then and that how that extends to my body. And I don't know, like sometimes as an art, like you have to do something.
Yeah,
You have to.
right, yeah, I know. It calls you.
Yeah.
Come in the studio.
Yeah.
We're waiting for you.
Yeah. So I feel like that's just what I just, like just something so deep in me that I'm like, I have to do, I need to like.
Yes.
I mean, I
with
feel
this,
like
yeah.
the same question could be posed to you, Lester, because, even just making the slideshow today, I didn't even get in images of every single modality in which you've worked across your career. So I guess I'd like to pick your brain as well on that topic of
Well, I can't
trusting yourself.
explain as much as she did. But I'll try,
I know, I was in the
It's-
hot seat, really.
Yeah.
thrilled.
I think it's curiosity, the idea about materials that you haven't used before, the idea of a client requesting a project that either fits a space or works with a certain restriction, takes you to a place that you haven't been before, And the idea is you would also think about, okay, I have an inventory of all this stuff, and can't you buy one of those? Or, no, it can't fit, it won't work, And I could go on and on and on and tell stories, but just one story I'll just tell, or try to. We have obviously the Renaissance Center in Detroit. I was approached by a designer to ask me if I could take a wooden sculpture and change it into a different material, because different material, you wouldn't could put wood into a building like that because of the fire code. Can you do something in aluminum, And I would think, I've never worked in aluminum before, And he said, well, try it, give me a drawing, or give me a sketch or something. So we went through a process of doing that. But long story short is, I took it because I thought it was a challenge to do, And also, the man himself was my head of my school at the college, So if it didn't work, he would say it doesn't work, But also on the other side, it might be a door open to another chance of doing something else. So the idea was, and this is to me the most satisfying part of this Detroit community of artists, is that you have other artists around who will help you, advise you. If I wanted to do a polished aluminum, where would I go? And they knew a place that they would recommend, You could trust this person to do it. And the difference between what I started out with is that you could do everything in yourself. You could start it, you could finish it, you could frame it, you could present it, you could show it, you could do everything, but it all starts with you and ends with you. This way, you'd have to take somebody who you'd never met before, trust them to buy the aluminum, or you would buy the aluminum. They could give you like a little deposit on the project, and that's where you buy all your material, and you hope it would all work, and in the budget they gave you. So you got aluminum, polished aluminum. You have to anodize the aluminum. You have to build somebody who could actually make the devices to install it, and so on and so forth. But the idea was, it happened and it worked, Unfortunately, that was the only aluminum piece I ever did. And at this point now, we have a young lady at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, is trying to find out what happened to the work, It was in the restaurant area of the Marriott Hotel, and it disappeared several years ago. And everybody wants to know, or at least she wants to know, what happened to it,
Is it Laura? Because I'd also like to know.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that about, obviously, commissions and so on and so forth. After you buy them, then you can't have any control over what happens to them. So that's the reality of it.
So I'm getting the signal from Lila that we only have got a couple minutes left before we want to open it to Q&A. So I'm going to ask one final question with hopefully maybe a prompt answer. And this is one I threw in yesterday. So because we are in this Detroit as Resource conversation in collaboration with the exhibition upstairs, I wanted to ask you both to speak about how the city has impacted your practice over your lifetime, Lester, and for you for the past about 5 years.
Thank you. Actually, the city has impacted my practice in a way that is so incredibly surprising, which we talked about when you came to visit me at my studio. I feel like, before moving here, I had no idea, but the agricultural practices and movements and really deep commitment to ecology and feeding people, right? Creating access for people to have food, fresh food, clean food that comes from your local community. So the farming in this city is so incredible, and I'm immersed deeply in it. And I when you came, my studio is in my home, like a garage studio, and my whole backyard is a farm. And it has been so incredible to kind of work that way and think again, expanding my idea of what it means to create, what it means to be a steward, what it means to care for something. And that act of putting a seed in the ground, and I do all this nurturing, but you ultimately have no control of what happens, right? Nature will do what nature wants to do. It feels like such a really wonderful metaphor for these more kind of traditional or museum gallery-based practices that I have, because now I'm thinking about things in a longer capacity and trajectory, where I feel like the art world right now, it's very market driven. Everything is quick right now, your hot 10 people right now list, and it's crazy. It feels very crazy. But this idea of something lasting or being elongated over years, decades, that's how I'm thinking about creativity. And then in a practical way, I'm thinking more about social practice, and I'm actually going to go to farm school and learn about organic farming practices, and then bring that into a new project that I'm working on. And that's a direction I don't think I would have ever gone in if I had not been here. So that feels really incredible to me.
It's amazing.
Well, I can't say anything about that because I work Eastern Market, so. But I'm trying to support those farmers that come in and supply us food. And I come to your backyard. Okay. Do you have a discount for AAR people?
Free.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, okay.
In exchange for one studio visit,
Okay, all
you
right,
get
all
some
right.
lettuce.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
if
would
you're
be
lucky
great.
enough to do a studio visit with Allana, you might leave with some garlic.
Yes, you will.
Well, I'd like to have a garden ourselves, but we have a squirrel population that says, no, we eat first, and whatever's left, you can have it, that sort of thing. But, I think the art community in Detroit, obviously the artists, the collectors, and to me, it's been really uplifting to find how many artists or colleagues at the school that I worked at in Wayne State and every other university around, Eastern, Western, Cranbrook, everything, has been accepting of the work that you've done and not necessarily putting everything into a category, you know. I mean, the other day I was looking at the Detroit Receiving Hospital collection with Grace very much a part of that collection. But the diversity in that collection, I think, is outstanding. You know, so many artists from so many places are there to help to give some support to the people that are going to the hospital, which is, I think, wonderful. But most of the art that I've made or have worked on, I couldn't have done it by myself. You know, the idea of collaborative spirit in so many ways has been so outstanding. It was, you know, the new technology, things that you've done. I don't have a studio that has a master printer and all the other things that are available to that. And so you have to, you know, keep a connection to people that are willing to help you. I mean, they'll give you advice, and you know, just you know, I could go on and on and on. But one example comes to me very, very clearly, is that years ago, and I hadn't been there for a long time, I taught a class at the Birmingham Bloomfield Art Association. One of my students in the class told me that after seeing some of my work, I was doing paper and things like that, collage and so on and so forth. She said, I'm going to Africa, and if you want me to, I will buy you a piece of cloth that, you know, that you can't get at Joann Fabric. And, you know, I would like to, you know, contribute to your work, you know. And I said, well, I would like for you to do that, but only one condition, and that is I will pay you for the fabric that you bring back. And she said, oh, no, wait till you see it, and so on and so forth. So she brought this outstanding piece of fabric back. And I offered to pay her, and she wouldn't accept it. So we jostled around, and you know, I didn't want to disturb the class and everything. And so the teacher's going off his, you know. I said, no, okay, I'll take it, you know. So then when I got the cloth, you know, it was wonderful, and I didn't want to actually, you know, cut it up or do anything else with it. You know, I wanted to save it, so I just put it aside. So long story short, it was something I used at a project that I'm working on. But that is the, you know, significant, because there are so many other people that have been very giving and sharing of their skills and everything to make this possibility. You know, I couldn't do it by myself. And you know, I can't name everybody that was there, because we'd be here until, you know, the cows come home and so forth. But I would like to really tell everybody that this community, I think, is outstanding to assist and help everybody who ask for it, and sometimes you don't even ask for it. They will offer you suggestion, a comment, advice, and so on and so forth, which I think is outstanding for Detroit.
Thank you both so much. Lila, do you want to hand it off for some questions? All right, wonderful. Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome. Thank you, Allana, Lester, and Kat, for treating us to this wonderful conversation. I think we have time for just a couple of questions. Sure. I'll go around this way.
One of the things that I've been thinking about over the past few years is, for those of you that don't know, I'm a photographer, but I'm tired of showing with other photographers in group shows where the work has no relationship to anybody else's work other than it's photographic, is working with other artists who are thinking along the same ideas but working in other media. And I'm wondering what you've done in terms of that kind of, if you've done anything in terms of that kind of exploration, and are you interested in that kind of exploration?
I'm going first all the time.
You're the photographer.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, obviously, I still make photographs. My background is photography, but I feel I've never actually been in an all-photo show. So then for me, it's often things that are more thematic, but then people are working interdisciplinarily, very long word. But I think for me though, it's less about like thinking about that in relation to like an institution or some like formalized like exhibition, but it's more about like the people who I am, or the people and artists who I am close friends with, and then thinking across those complexities. I hope this is answering your question. It does in a different sort of way. Yeah. But yeah. So I think that's how I would answer, but I don't know if you have more experience.
Well, I think that sometimes the categories are misleading, because I think most artists are able to work in more than one discipline, you know. And I think the exhibits that we have should show that. Mm-hmm. You know, it shouldn't be necessarily just one skill or one direction in the show, and that's all there is, you know. Mm-hmm. I think the variety is important to do.
Hey, I think we have time for one last question.
Hello. Hi, thank you both for such a great conversation. My question is for Allana, but I've really appreciated hearing you talk about your investigations into Blackness, both as material and as this expansive conception of identity, but there also seems to be a really clear specificity in your work with the material that you're using of dye bond and thinking about the spaces of care and Black feminine spaces where that's being used. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about care and what you've learned from those Black feminine spaces in particular, and how it has affected your practice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, that's a really complicated question, but I will try to be as concise as possible for time constraints. But because the materials that I'm thinking about, which I grew up with and were associated with ideas of caring, but I even think about that term or approach it with a type of ambivalence, because I think that many of the practices that we inherit, and I think especially maybe from our mothers, or like the kind of matriarchs, right? How you are taught to understand femininity, understand a woman's place in the world. It is from a space of an attempt to care, but it can also be destructive and kind of diminish or destroy the ways in which you can understand yourself in like your full potential and complexity. And so that is then what I'm trying to contend with these materials, right? So like the hair bonding glue, it's used to like glue extensions into your hair, which is like a practice so many Black girls and women engage in. And I always try to put the caveat in that there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I think for me where it becomes problematic is when I think about the larger context and like legislation where if you have dreadlocks, if you have an afro, like those things are seen as negatives. And even, I'm sure all of us have seen like a news article where like some student was denied an opportunity because they had braids or they had dread, like things that are so ridiculous and have nothing to do with the possible ways you can exist and achieve in the world. But you get extracted from the larger society and denied opportunities because of hair, because of just who you are naturally. So then it becomes problematic when, as a young Black girl, you're introduced and like you inherit these practices where you need to have long straight hair, it needs to be tamed, like things need to be in a specific type of order, and it's introduced under this guise of care, but it is also trying to remove you from yourself ontologically, right? And so I can get really long-winded about this, so I'm going to try to not be, but it's not only about nourishing, or I was not taught to nourish, I was taught to kind of negate and minimize, and so using these materials that are associated with that, and for me to then try to reframe them in this space of multiplicity and freedom is my way of healing, but also contending with those complexities. And if you didn't know what even if you do know what this material is, the way in which you're introduced to it now is so far removed from how it operates in the world. And so like adding those new articulations to it, for me, then like thinks about that space of multiplicity, and imagining a new framework. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Allana Clarke and Lester Johnson, and Kat, of course, our Associate Curator of Collections. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to visit these works in the galleries right now, but please come back to see them in the future. If we could get a final round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you both.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.